Was I wrong for excluding my cheating husband from the delivery room and naming our baby without him? This is a throwaway account because I am so annoyed and need to vent. This will be a lot, so I am sorry in advance. I, Fallon, 28 female, had been together with my husband, Ethan, 27 male, for nearly 10 years. We got married at 21, had our first son a year after, followed by our daughter 3 years later. I built my whole life around my family. We got good jobs. He worked full-time, I worked from home. We had a good home in a great neighborhood, and we put our children in good schools. We also had a successful business on the side. I thought we did everything right. My best friend since we were in middle school lived close. We had our daughters around the same time, and we would have playdates all the time. We leaned on each other a lot. I gave her all the support when she was going through issues with her daughter's deadbeat father and got her in contact with a good lawyer. I leaned on her when I was recovering from my traumatic second birth and the depression that followed. We leaned on each other for everything. 10 months ago, I found out I was pregnant for the third time. I was really uneasy about this because of my traumatic experience the second time. Also, my husband and I both agreed we were done after our 2 children. I considered abortion, but my husband insisted we keep it. I was still uneasy about the pregnancy and borderline miserable for the next 6 months. I was diagnosed with hyperemesis gravidarum and was throwing up 20 times a day for 6 months straight. I lost a ton of weight, had to stop working, and was sent to the hospital frequently due to severe dehydration. My husband stood by me and showered me with attention, for which I was so grateful. He cut down his hours at work to look after me, the house, and the kids. My best friend would come to our home frequently to check on me and also help with the house. When I hit 6 months, the hyperemesis gravidarum decreased a lot, and I was almost back to myself. One night, after having a movie night with my family, my husband and I were getting ready to sleep. He fell asleep right away, while I quickly checked on the kids before getting into bed. His phone was vibrating like crazy, so, out of genuine curiosity, I unlocked his phone. We used to do this a lot when we were younger, so I did not think too much of it. I was already sitting in bed. I saw messages from my friend. They were frantic spam messages. One of them said, "Please come over. I need you." Another said, "I know I should not be messaging here, but I miss you, and come over when she is asleep." I think I was there in a daze for nearly 5 minutes. I cried a lot quietly, and the fatigue kind of left me. I scoured his phone looking for more. I saw emails and DMs from them both, even using apps like Kick to Message and the pictures. But the worst part was finding out my husband left me one time in the hospital with my mother while he went back home, where my kids were being babysat by my friend, and got intimate in our bedroom with our kids in the house. I kicked him out the following morning after confronting him and filed for separation sometime after. For the next 2 months, he had been begging for forgiveness, then complaining and insulting me that I am not letting him see his kids or that I am stopping him from going with me to doctor appointments, which we had planned months earlier. About who was going to be in the labor room, it was going to be my mother and husband. He called me when I was 35 weeks questioning the labor situation. At this point, he had moved in with my ex-friend's house shortly before this call. I said no, and he got very angry. Lots of my in-laws and family members told me to put our differences aside for our baby. I still said no. I gave birth to my son with my mother and sister present and did not feel any regret about my choice. After my second traumatic birth, I just wanted to make sure this one was as stable as possible, which it was. We were going to name our child after his father, who passed away. I went along with it to make him happy, but changed my mind and picked a name I had always loved since childhood. This aggravated him even more. Am I wrong? Because I am being guilt-tripped by many people right now? All I want is for everyone to leave me alone and for me to just be with my kids. Edit. Just wanted to add that I do let him see the kids. That would be crazy if I did not. My children love their dad. I just have certain boundaries now that we are not together, and he does not respect them. He gets angry and says things that are categorically not true. He got to meet our newborn son hours after I gave birth. Update. So I am back after nearly a whole year. I completely forgot about this post because I have been so wrapped up in other things. For anyone who does not want to read the whole post, here is a summary. My husband had been cheating on me with my best friend while I was pregnant. I was close to giving birth and decided not to have my then husband in the labor room with me. I also chose a name for our baby that he did not agree with. Like I said, it has basically been a whole year. My baby turned 1 today, and after celebrating his birthday and Christmas with my kids, it finally hit me that this is my new reality. First of all, my ex-husband and I finally went through with the divorce proceedings. I had been holding it off during my pregnancy and early postpartum period to avoid added stress and to carefully plan for my children and myself. I was awarded primary physical custody of our children. Their dad visits once a week, and the two older kids, 7 and 4, spend every other weekend with him. My youngest will start doing the same in a couple of months, which makes me nervous. He is especially clingy with me. All my kids are, but my youngest has really only known me as the most present parent. One of the main stipulations in our custody agreement is that my ex's affair partner is prohibited from seeing the kids. My poor kids have been confused enough by their parents' sudden split, and I did not want them even more confused by seeing their aunt, who is supposed to be mommy's best friend, with their dad. It was deemed emotionally detrimental in court. As for the baby name, he has been so bitter about it. I think he is still mad about it. His side has been trying to convince me to change the name to something we would both like, especially after the divorce was finalized. But it has been a year now, and the baby quite literally answers by the name I gave him, so I am not going to be changing it. He was also unhappy with the child support payments, among other payments, and asked for some revisions. One main thing he asked to change was the cost of our kids' school tuition. He pays for their tuition, which he felt was too much and too harsh, but the court stuck with the original payments. As for my ex-husband and ex-best friend, they continued dating. I found out that they had started seeing each other a month into my third pregnancy. They had actually slept together during my second pregnancy, but did not pursue a relationship then because, as they put it, they were not ready to ruin things and did not want to hurt anybody. My ex's side have been very supportive of their relationship, even inviting her to holiday gatherings like Thanksgivings or family holidays. Because of this, my kids do not go very often to these events. I do not know, after this whole fiasco, I am coming to the realization that perhaps my ex's side never really liked me all that much, but that is okay. I eventually spoke with my ex-best friend to ask why they did it. She claimed that they were just friends, but grew close while she was dealing with issues involving her deadbeat ex-boyfriend. Both of them insisted that my ex-husband just wanted to protect her, which supposedly turned into love. Hearing this hurt me a lot, but at the same time, I felt relieved to know the truth. When I sat with this information for a while, it stopped hurting. It made me realize that I did not still love my ex-husband and could finally let go of him and their betrayal. They broke up a week ago. Apparently, it is just a break, though who knows. Although my kids go to their dad's house every other weekend, it has helped a lot with making time for myself. Obviously, I am figuring out who I am without being a wife or mom all the time. In many ways, I find what happened to be a true blessing, which is why I am no longer angry. As for me, I have been seeing someone. It has not been very long, but we get along great. Initially, my ex-husband made the whole situation difficult. He did not want me to have any men specifically around the kids. Edit: I do not know how to update posts, so my apologies if it is wrong. Now to the next story. Story 2. I grew up in indifference, loved by my grandparents despite neglect and being used. I forgave my parents in their old age. I was a surprise and an afterthought for parents in their 40s with a daughter who was 10 years old. My mother used to say, "We did not plan for you," as if she were monitoring the weather. The message was plain, but she would not say the rest. I was only here because my grandparents convinced my reluctant parents to have another child. My sister, Hazel, was already engrossed in her adolescent world when I got there. She acted indifferently, not viciously, like if I did not exist. I would play with my dolls in the corner of our shared living room while she was on the phone, split out on the sofa, discussing college applications and boys. Mom would urge Hazel not to forget anything as she carefully placed her SAT preparation materials in her backpack. In the meantime, I would wait at the kitchen table in the hopes that someone would assist me with my school work, but assistance was infrequent. Rather, a pattern set by my parents influenced my life. Every morning, they dropped me off at my grandparents' place. My grandparents' house became my real home. When my father would jingle his keys and tell my grandfather, "You wanted her, she's all yours," they made sure I was fed and taken care of, picked me up from school, helped me with my homework, and took me to the park. My parents would show up late at night, looking exhausted and a little annoyed at the trouble of having to come get me. "Ashley, you are the best thing that ever happened to us," my grandma would remark as she gave me a final hug each night. I could almost forget that I was not loved at home in her warm embrace. This pattern persisted year after year and day after day. In my parents' home, I learned to live as an afterthought, while my sister got ready for her promising future. My grandparents' devotion, however, never wavered. One day you will understand that sometimes the best things in life are not planned. My grandfather would wink at me as we worked on arithmetic problems, and for a minute the weight of being unloved was lifted off my little shoulders. I hoped that would change when Hazel left for college. As the daughter who stayed, perhaps my parents would finally see me. I was completely mistaken. My mother's voice rang out to me as soon as I entered the house after school. "Ashley, the house has to be cleaned. Begin with the restrooms." I took over all of the tasks that Hazel had previously handled, in addition to a number of other duties. I got to know the washing machine settings by heart, and it became my daily companion. The housework seemed to go on forever. Every time I hesitated, my father would remark, "You have to help. You live here." Your sister always took the brunt of it. The changes at home were not even gradual. By the time I was 14, after work, they expected dinner to be ready, so I made spaghetti that night. But my mother abruptly stopped preparing it, saying, "You are old enough now." It was good, albeit a little overcooked. My parents ate in silence until my father stated, "Tomorrow, try something with chicken," without raising his head in a tone that made it obvious this was not a recommendation. My escape was to dream about college. Every night after finishing my homework and chores, I would go to my room and go to university websites, visualizing myself strolling around campus, unencumbered by the never-ending responsibilities at home. One Sunday afternoon when I was 16, Hazel came home with news that changed everything. A tall, well-dressed man followed her as she entered. She exclaimed, "Mom, Dad, this is Daniel. We are engaged." As if someone had declared a lottery victory, my parents leaped from their seats, and my mother wept with delight. My mother, embracing Hazel, exclaimed, "We pay for everything. It has to be flawless for our first daughter's wedding." My father immediately began phoning family members. The house was bustling with wedding preparations for months. Discussions centered on guest lists, venues, and flowers. Designer clothing and upscale shops were commonplace. Despite being present at the wedding, my grandparents were uncomfortable with the extravagant decor. While my grandfather nodded solemnly at the champagne fountain, my grandma scowled at the ice sculpture, which was probably worth more than a semester's worth of college tuition. They did not share their thoughts. 3 college admission letters surrounded me as I sat at the dinner table 2 years later. Every one of my top options had accepted me. It had paid off after years of playing Cinderella and getting straight A's. I told my folks the news with a fluttering heart. "That is nice," my mother said, not even raising her head from her dinner. "But we spent all our savings on your sister's wedding, even took out a loan. There is nothing left for college." I muttered, "But you still paid for Hazel's college." "That was different," said my mom. "We considered her to have promise." At the table, the silence grew intolerable. My parents were still eating, unconcerned that they had just dashed my hopes, and my admission letters felt heavier in my hands. In between nibbles, my father added, "You should find a job, save some money. That is what responsible adults do. Take out a student loan." I walked away from the table without requesting an excuse, tears running down my cheeks. I contacted my grandmother, who lived nearby. Trembling, I was at their door in a matter of minutes, sobbing in her consoling arms as I told them everything. My granddad listened carefully, his face hardening, but I could not quite pinpoint something in his eyes. When I was done, my grandfather's voice was forceful. "Ashley, we have been expecting this." I said, "What do you mean?" My grandma softly said, "We have seen how they treated you over the years, how they spent on Hazel's education, her wedding. We knew they might do this to you." After disappearing into his study, my grandfather came back, carrying a folder. He said, "We have been saving for your education since the day you were born," and he opened it to show bank documents. "You are covered. You can choose any of those 3 colleges." That night I returned home and began packing, only the things I would need, not everything. My parents barely looked away from the television when I told them I was moving in with my grandparents. "Whatever you think is best," my mother murmured, her eyes never leaving the screen, and I sensed relief in her voice. The weeks that followed were spent getting ready for college. Motivated by my parents' inadequate money management, I decided to get a degree in financial analysis in order to learn how to do things correctly. My grandparents assisted me with every aspect, from purchasing supplies to completing paperwork. It was like entering a whole new world when courses began that fall. Even though the school work was difficult, I thoroughly enjoyed it. Every lecture felt like a stride toward a brighter future and a step away from my past. I was so excited that my lecturers noticed me. Before long, I was staying after class to talk about difficult financial ideas. Someone other than my grandparents saw potential in me for the first time in my life. My grandmother contacted me during my sophomore year of college to share some shocking Hazel news. During one of our weekly calls, she mentioned that her sister was experiencing difficulties. Daniel is unable to maintain a job, and her marketing career is not progressing as expected. They are constantly requesting money from your parents. The fact that my parents were providing them with money did not surprise me. With a sigh, my grandmother said, "Your mother spent all of her retirement money last month to pay their rent. They just can't refuse her." The situation deteriorated a year later. Despite my parents' financial assistance, Hazel and Daniel were unable to pay their rent and returned to my former bedroom, which I had maintained immaculate for years. I did not miss the irony. In the meantime, I was doing well. I was given internships at prominent financial firms by my teachers, where I was able to hone my innate ability to solve challenging financial challenges. My confidence increased with each project. "You have a natural sense for this," my boss said to me during a Morgan Stanley performance assessment. "We hope to see you again in the summer." I ignored my grandparents' sporadic calls since I was too preoccupied with my education and future plans, but I knew right away that something was not right when I went to see them in my senior year. My grandmother's bright smile was forced, and my grandfather, who is normally happy, sat quietly in his recliner. Unspoken comments weighed heavily on the house. I inquired over dinner, "What is wrong?" I urged, "Don't tell me it is nothing," as they pushed food around their plates. "I am too familiar with you both." They looked at each other in a way that I had seen a lot before, which indicated that they were attempting to shield me from terrible news. My grandfather finally said something. "Last week your parents visited us," he remarked in a tired tone. "They requested their share of the inheritance." "What are you saying?" I dropped my fork and asked. My grandmother clarified that they were having issues with the banks, numerous credit card debts and loans. They claimed that in order to stay out of bankruptcy, they needed $200,000. I was so angry that I could not control myself. "You also handed it to them?" My grandfather gave a nod. "Ashley, we had to. They are still our daughter and son-in-law despite everything," he remarked. "It was most of our savings," my grandmother said quietly. "The majority of your funds." I let out a yell. After their actions, how did they allow Hazel's careless actions to continue after the way they handled me? Across the table, my grandmother reached out and took my hands. "We understand your rage, sweetie, but what is done is done. We will be all right." I was not feeling it, though. I was furious. After treating me like a servant and never having the funds for my education, my parents now had the gall to demand money from the only people who had ever shown me genuine concern. After I graduated, my efforts were rewarded. I was employed by one of the best financial firms in the area thanks to my excellent internship experiences and the excellent recommendations from my teachers. The initial pay was more than I could have ever imagined. I had a tremendous sense of independence when I discovered a tiny, tidy, and safe one-bedroom apartment. Knowing I had no one else to cook for, I awoke each morning with gratitude and threw myself into every new task. I received incentives and promotions much beyond what my younger self could have ever dreamed of. I saved enough for a down payment on a home. While my career took off, I could not help but think about my parents and Hazel on the day I signed the mortgage papers because they had never been able to manage their finances well enough to own a home. We had not communicated in years, so it is unlikely that they would learn about my accomplishment. Then came the call that made all the difference. A severe heart attack had struck my grandfather. By the time I got to the hospital, he was gone. My grandma seemed to lose her spark after spending more than 50 years by his side. She followed him less than 2 months later. I was in the parlor organizing my grandmother's funeral when I heard a voice I recognized. "Ashley, would you like assistance making the arrangements?" I turned and saw my mom. She was older and more worn out than I had recalled. Something in her eyes made me think twice before telling her to go. "Yes," I said in a quiet voice. "It would be pleasant." Over the course of the following few days, my parents started to open up as we planned the service. They acknowledged that they were having financial difficulties. One time while we were selecting flowers, my father remarked, "Retirement hasn't been kind to us." And with the twins of Jessica twins, I broke off startled. "Yes, 4-year-olds," my mom answered with a small smile. "What lovely boys, however. We assist where we can because Hazel and Daniel are still unable to handle alone." I kept my face expressionless as I nodded. There are some things that never change. We gathered in a wood panel office for the reading of the will 1 week after my grandmother was laid to rest. The tension in the room was palpable as I sat across from my parents, Hazel and Daniel. Mr. Patterson, the notary, put on his spectacles and started reading. He remarked, "We leave our home at 1542 Maple Street and the amount of $150,000 to our dear granddaughter Ashley." There was a deafening silence that ensued. Hazel's jaw dropped wide in disbelief, and my mother's knuckles turned white as she seized my father's arm. Mr. Patterson read on. After clearing his throat, he turned to face my mother and added, "And a personal note from Mr. Henderson to his daughter Margaret. Remember, Margaret, that we provided you with $200,000 just when you needed it most. We trust that you will respect our ultimate choice just as we respected your needs." My mother's face turned pale after flushing hot as my father gazed at the floor. Hazel and Daniel exchanged anxious looks. After the will reading, my parents came up to me in the parking lot, their once confident manner from the funeral planning now tinged with desperation. My mother said in a shaky voice, "Ashley, honey, you must understand, we always assumed the house would be ours. We were relying on it. We are having trouble." My dad combed through his thinning hair. "The house would be very helpful for Hazel's family's expenses and the mortgage." The years of neglect, the incessant reminders that I was not wanted, and their refusal to pay for my education came back to me as I looked at them. "No," I firmly answered. "I own the house. This is what Grandma and Grandpa wanted." Even as Hazel interjected that her twins needed a yard to play in, they followed me begging to my car. Remaining strong, I got into my car and drove off. My mother called me a week later to invite me to supper. She spoke in an extremely modest tone. I agreed against my better judgment. The house looked worse than I remembered when I got there. The gutter sagged, the paint was peeling, and the previously immaculate grass was overgrown and spotty. The house was neat yet chaotic inside. Tommy and Jake, Hazel's twins, sprinted around the living room, their curly hair and sparkling eyes endearing yet vivacious. My mother pulled me into an awkward embrace and murmured, "Ashley, your favorite pot roast was prepared by us." "It is not my favorite," I responded without thinking. "Hazel loves that the most." My father clearing his throat was the only sound to break the uneasy stillness that ensued. "Well, how about sharing your favorite food with us?" he inquired. They looked genuinely interested, which surprised us. "We would love to know." They inquired about my job, my house, and my hobbies over supper. They paid close attention as I discussed my financial profession, even though a lot of it was beyond their comprehension. Another dinner followed, and then another. Before long, I was bringing gifts for the twins, enjoying holidays with them, and even helping Hazel with her schoolwork. I sometimes offered to help when they indicated that the house needed repairs. I even painted the front of the house, paid for a new roof, and restored the heating system. My parents wept with appreciation each time I sent them a check. My mother would embrace me and say, "You are too kind to us. We do not deserve this." I often thought, "You are right," but I never actually said it out loud. A tiny part of me remained hopeful that people might change in spite of all the years of abuse and neglect. As the years went by, my career kept growing. New chances arose with each promotion, and my investments increased dramatically. At the same time, I felt that my relationship with my parents was getting better. They were both already over 70, and I began to wish I could do something meaningful for them. I said, "I have been thinking," as I watched my father strain to get out of his chair at one of our Sunday dinners, "I would like to purchase a new home for you, something comfy for your retirement years that is single-story, has a lovely garden, and is easier to maintain. You are no longer a good fit for this house." I was astounded by their reactions, which were sincere, joyous tears. We spent weeks looking for a house together before locating the ideal one, a stunning ranch-style home in a quiet neighborhood with spacious entrances and no stairs. After I closed my checkbook, my parents continued to remark about how thrilled they were. My father responded, "We need to plan a suitable housewarming party." A knot of bitterness tightened in my stomach as I observed the celebration from the shadows across the street. Inside, my parents' friends mixed with relatives I hardly knew, with their faces flushed with excitement. Hazel, her husband, and their twin boys were the center of attention. I was the afterthought daughter they had never trusted, and I was the reason for it all. Radiant, my parents walked through the crowd like kings and queens, having at last achieved their long-held goal of owning a lovely home that would serve as a symbol of security and comfort. I gave a sour laugh. I had not even received an invitation to the party from them. I felt like an outsider to their enjoyment, a foreigner. The realization was a sharp pain that echoed the years of disregard and apathy I had experienced. I recalled the hours I had spent studying while Hazel relished the results of their constant support, the sacrifices I had made, and the lonely nights I had spent daydreaming about leaving our home's oppressive atmosphere. And now here they were enjoying my triumph without realizing the pain they had brought about. I stayed put because of a deep-seated dread of rejection that had been ingrained in me since I was a young child. In front of their visitors, I wanted to storm across the street, confront them, and reveal their hypocrisy. Instead, I felt a wave of blazing, searing rage. With the sounds of their jubilation fading behind me, I turned and left. Long after the music ended, the unfairness of it all left a foul taste in my throat. That evening, I decided something. I would no longer be the unseen hand that kept their lives afloat, their silent benefactor. I would separate myself, retreat, and shield myself from more harm. My parents' reactions when I informed them that I was severing my relationship were predictable shock, incredulity, and charges of ingratitude. My voice still lacked the warmth I had compelled myself to display throughout the years. I experienced a strange mixture of relief at finally being freed from their emotional control, sadness for the family I had never really known, and longing for the love I had always craved. When I hung up the phone, it was an opportunity to start again and live my life as I saw fit, free from the burden of the past. Years went by. I created a meaningful and purposeful existence. My career took off, and I found solace in the quiet fulfillment that came from my work. I purchased a modest, cozy home that was really mine. I even found a loving man who accepted me for who I am. The news then struck me like a blow to the body. All the old scars, all the years of bitterness and contempt returned with a vengeance. I struggled with my emotions, torn between the desire for revenge and a persistent sense of duty. The days became restless nights. The fallen leaves crunched underfoot as I strolled down the well-known streets in my area. Every step was like traveling through my memory maze. I reflected on my grandparents whose steadfast love shone brightly in the shadows of my early years. Their compassionate and wise faces seemed to be whispering in the breeze, pleading with me to forgive. I finally made the decision to break out from the pattern of abandonment and neglect that had molded my existence. Instead of being angry, I decided to face my parents with the quiet respect they had never shown me. My mother, who had formerly been strong and authoritative, was now slender and bewildered, her eyes clouded with terror. My father clung to her hand with a desperation that reflected my own boyhood desire, his once strong voice now reduced to a ragged whisper. I went to see them in the nursing home, a cold, impersonal structure that smelled of decay and disinfectant. I had a peculiar sense of calm when I saw them, in a way devoid of their strength and pretense. A deep melancholy took the place of the rage that had festered for so long. They were the ones who had given birth to me. They were still my parents in spite of their faults and failures. It was not simple. My hard-won tranquility was challenged by occasional bursts of hatred and hostility, but I remained with them day after day. I met their demands and gave them the attention and consolation they had long denied me. My mother looked at me with a clarity I had not seen in years. One evening, as I sat next to her bed and held her weak hand with a shaky voice, she replied, "Ashley, I am so sorry we neglected you." My eyes filled with tears. It was the recognition of the hurt they had inflicted, the apology I had longed for all my life. I became aware that I had at last escaped. At that instant, I was no longer bound by the past. I could move on with my life, forgive, and heal. We discovered a shaky calm in those final days, a provisional comprehension that went beyond years of pain and disappointment. Although it was not the perfect family I had envisioned, it was sufficient. In a tale that had started with neglect and finished with forgiveness, it was closure, the last chapter. Thank you for watching. If you have not subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.